Today we are going to learn Interpret of Melodies by Jumpha Lahiri. Interpret of Melodies by Jumpha Lahiri speaks about social melodies in the society. Although that is by Jumpha Lahiri, who had two cultural identities. She was born in India, but she lived in UK. So bicultural identities they are with the short story. In this short story, basically we find the title as very significant because the main characters, when it comes to the non-residential Indian family, that is the Das family, and the Indian Eastern family, the Kapasi. So there are two contrasting situations in the short story. One is the non-residential Indian Das family, Mr. Das and Mrs. Das, who had some problems with their family life. Tina and Bobby, they are real babies, and Tina and Ronnie, they are real babies, and Bobby comes from outside marriage. So that is a kind of a problem they have in their social melody. So they need to have interpretation. So they seeks interpretation from the perspective of the Kapasi. Kapasi is doing dual role here. One is as a chauffeur, that is a driver, a tourist guide like that. The other one is interpreter of melodies. So he does a small minor job with the doctor. I mean, interpreting, translating many things to the doctors, and it should be more accurate translation. So here also we find these two main concerns in terms of Mr. Kapasi's character. So when you learn this short story, we need to focus about comparatively study for your exam preparation, especially when it comes to Cat in the Rain and the Interpret of Melodies. It has more common features, because danger of romanticizing with Mrs. Das and Kapasi can be seen from the perspective of Cat in the Rain in George and American Wife. So that's a very significant feature. So lack of communication between Mr. Das and Mrs. Das is significant. Also in Cat in the Rain also the American Wife and the George, they have lack of communication. So you have some similarities between those two short stories. So exam preparation, we need to focus on those things also. And the other thing is that the cultural alienation when it comes to this short story, especially from the non-residential Indians culture versus the non-residential Indian culture from the Western influence, and the Indian Eastern culture represent from the Kapasi. Especially Kapasis, they are Konaraka temple, the cultural roots. Although this family wants to go and find Konaraka temple and visits about their cultural roots like that, really they couldn't find their cultural roots. Either they have alienated from their cultural things, and they are living in a kind of disengaged marriage life. Even the same thing, Mr. Kapasi also does not communicate with her wife, and she also has a loveless marriage. So there's a vacuum. So vacuum is filled from the Meena and the Kapasi, kind of romanticizing with the legs of the Meena from the rear view of the Kapasi's viewpoint, but that is also not realistically realized when it comes to the realization that Bobby is coming from outside marriage. So those are some of the issues we need to focus on. And in this story, the identity issues really significant when it comes to the discussion. And there are three main motives. Seeing is there because seeing the marriage life of these families, and looking at the Konaraka temple, looking at the naked bodies of women like that. So camera is obsessed with the science teacher, who is very much obsessed with the technology, and is not communicating with the wife fully. And the puff fries, that is selfish motives of Mrs. Das is revealed, and she is very much concerned about her own alienation. She tries to get rid of her own boredom of the marriage life. So she tries to find some kind of interpretation for her life from her life. So that is also we have to study from these three main motives in this story and focus. We have to give more priority when you study the story. The romanticizing of Mrs. Das and the capacity, the lack of communication between these two characters. The lack of communication appears from the Mr. Das and Mrs. Das. Mrs. Das is glued with the guidebook and Mrs. Das is concerned with the sunglasses, so like that. So that is lack of communication and interpreting also. So they are interpreting, I mean the Miss Capacity has to interpret certain melodies of physical melodies to the doctor, so it should be more accurate interpretation. So it's also communication, related to communication. Capacity and the wife, they don't communicate well, so they have loveless marriage, so that is also a problem with the communication. Younger age, this Capacity knows many languages, but when it comes to her older age, he knows English perfectly, right? So Meena is used by the children to address the mother. That is also something we need to think about, the communication level and the cultural roots when it comes to parenting styles and addressing children from the first name of the mother. So we don't accept those things. So it also again comes from the cultural alienation of cultural displaced families. So we need to always focus on the questions of the identity. So what is the real identity of this family, whether it is bicultural identity, so whether they belong to America or the India. So they are trying to figure out certain things, their roots like that. So they have some alienation. So care and neglect, especially when it comes to Tina and Ronnie, the parenting style of these two parents, they are irresponsible in their care, and the danger of and that is a kind of a thing that we have to study about when it comes to non-residential Western style of parenting styles. So these are some of the concerns when it comes to exams. We very much concerned about catching the rain with interpret of melodies and always interpret about the cultural alienation between these two cultures, and we concern about the identity crisis, identity issues with regard to the short story interpret of melodies, and always compare and contrast this one with action and reaction. Sometimes action and reaction is Sri Lankan story. It's about karma and Buddhist philosophical things. But this story is about more cultural problems, identity issues are there. So when you come to your exam, settings you can compare Sri Lankan story, but this is two cultural settings are there in the story like that. So we need to focus about comparative studies when it comes to our exam preparations, right? So that is up to for today's short video. We'll meet from some other stories. So you can subscribe my channel and you can share the videos. And we are trying to give best of knowledge for you to get your results good in your A-level exams. Thank you very much. I go on.